Okay, we're now going to move into insights into one of the most overlooked audiences on the media plan. Jordan, to tell us all about this, who have we got?
Yeah, so 5% of the UK population is Muslim, a community with great buying power, and yet many agencies and brands fail to create a strategy to reach and connect with these potential customers. So in this session, you'll hear what it takes to build a strategy for these often overlooked audiences. So please welcome Gabriela Paiva, Insight Director at and Nafisa, Bakkar, CEO and co-founder, Amaliah, speaking with Michael Brown, Head of Insight and Research for Worldwide.
I'm Gabriela Paiva. I'm Insights Director at though I don't look like her. At we don't underestimate the power of diversity in advertising. That's why, across the years, we've been committed in our initiative supporting media planners and media platforms and publishers that stands for equality, Better World Media. Today, to continue building on that support, we're launching our new initiative, Amplify, through which we'll partner with different platforms that stands for equality to support them and gain understanding of their audiences and how brands can better support them. Our first partner in this exciting new series is Amaliah. For those of you who don't know, Amaliah is a platform dedicated to creating content to Muslim audience. And we want to bring some of the results from that research today. But first, let's talk about our objectives. Our main goal with this research was to gain a deeper understanding of the unique perspectives and behaviors of this audience. That's why we partner with Amaliah to speak to their engaged audience through an online quantitative survey where we collected insights from over 200 respondents, the majority being Muslim women from across the UK. This research gave us a really good view into their unique perspective and nuances, and went beyond just regular demographics. We gather insights about their political leanings, income levels, preference, lifestyle choices, and much, much more. We all know that the Muslim community in the UK is a growing demographic, and it counts with almost 4 million individuals currently. And half of them are currently under 30 years old. They also have a massive contribution to the economy, contributing an estimate £31 billion every year. But besides their size and economic impact, we don't see much representation of this audience. Our research found that only 14% feel they see Muslims being represented in advertising often. And the little representation that does exist is often perceived as being quite stereotypical, with almost 60% saying so. This statement from our research illustrates this feeling that Muslim representation lacks authenticity. I cannot think of a single brand where the inclusion of a brown girl has felt genuinely authentic. It always just feels like they need to check a token brown girl, hijab, Muslim off the list of diversity inclusions. We also wanted to understand if there was any particular category that were leading the way for representation. And what we found was a bit concerning. Across all the categories we asked about, none show a net positive score for authentic Muslim representation. However, there is some hope, as 25% said that beauty brands tend to represent their community in a positive way. However, whilst many brands fall short, there are some exceptions. When asked about brands that do well for representation, there were mentions to FIFA, Tesco, Gymshark, Sainsbury, and Nike. And here are some of the great examples that these brands are putting out there. We also wanted to understand from our audience what brands could be doing to better support them. And here are some of the main takeaways that we got from it. Brands should be listening and learning, and actually researching what Muslims need rather than relying on stereotypes. They also need to build authentic connections and really engage and understand what this audience needs. Another point that they mentioned was that brands need to bring more the joy and positivity of this vibrant community into their ads. And lastly, brands need to recognize that this is not one single group of individuals. They are a multitude of people, so they need to recognize their individuality. By doing so, brands will be able to unlock the purchase power and loyalty of this audience. Our research found that 75% of Muslims are more likely to purchase from brands that portray their community in a positive and authentic way. I'll now invite Michael and Nafisa to the stage to talk more about Amaliah and what brands could be doing to better support this community.
Gabby, thank you. Thank you and well done. You've put an awful lot of effort and heart into the research this year, so I just wanted to recognise that before going further. Hi, everyone. Just some opening thoughts by way of introduction to Nafisa. I think just from the various themes around the pace of change and different pressures in our industry that we've been hearing about this morning, it's felt quite clear to me that a career in media is not for the faint-hearted. And among us, there's one segment of people which I admire in particular, and that is founders of independent media platforms. We'll hear lots from Nafisa about her journey with Amaliah, but the reality is that it's a segment that's actually dwindling. It's not growing. We heard of Galdem going out of business last year, and that was one of the most, thriving and editorially impressive platforms in this category. And so I really hope that as we go through the content today, that perhaps you think about how we can better, support, embrace this important part of our industry. Nafisa, hello.
Hello, thanks
Hi.
for having me.
Thank you for being here. So very proud to partner with you. Please, can you tell us your story?
So Amaliah has been running for 8 years, and I started it, I would say, very naively. We didn't set out with ambitions to start a media company. We didn't set out to work with brands. We didn't even know this world existed. But we knew that there needed to be a space, and the stats of how Muslims are represented in media are very damning. And that was 8 years ago. They still are. 59% of articles in mainstream media represent Muslims negatively. A third misrepresent. The most common theme is terrorism. I could go on, but there is a deep history of how Muslims are presented as a bogeyman, especially in the UK and globally. And that impacts identity and confidence in identity. So for us, when we set out with Amaliah, it was how do we create a world where Muslim women and Muslims can thrive? And the data that we've done more recently, which is 8 years later, still shows that 34% of our audience on a daily or weekly basis feel that they are not equal to others. And there is so much context behind that, but I think it's important to then understand that brands have a big role in that whole conversation, and there's so much research already talking about how people are looking to brands instead of governments to be that place to facilitate community, to find expression and identity, because trust is low in governments through climate change, wars, genocides, economic instability. People are looking at brands to be almost the third space of what they're feeling they're being failed at. So 8 years, it is not for the faint-hearted, but today we look like a media company which is for Muslim women. We also have a sister brand called Halal Gems, which is all about food, things to do. And we work with a lot of brand partners, and again, that was all very accidental. It started with eBay sort of knocking on our door and saying, hey, will you come to California and consult us to understand this audience? That's in 2016 when modest fashion was really taking off. And we thought, this is just a fluke. This is just one of those big glitzy moments that happens in a founder's journey, but then it kind of kept happening, and we started realizing the power in our audience that brands were seeing and coming to us for. So that's been our journey.
Thanks, Nafisa. I mentioned Galdem going bust, a real lamentable moment in our industry's modern history, I would say. What are your observations on the realities, not least commercially, of running an independent media platform today?
I mean, I always say that if I worked in a mainstream agency, I think I would smash my sales targets, because selling for an independent media brand is really hard. And there are a lot of different things that make it hard, which could be a whole panel in itself. But I think one of the things is we are seeing increasingly a society that is moving from distrust to polarization. And we are seeing that more recently with race riots, with the genocide, with the US elections. We're seeing that in politics. We're seeing people in the highest place in office in politics being able to say quite damning things about lots of different marginalized communities, and it be okay, and then the same reflected in media. And I think we would be naive to think that that doesn't trickle into agencies and boardrooms and brands and planning and seasonal activities. And so the biggest thing is that agencies move really fast, media moves really fast. And so it's very easy to forget the most marginalized groups unless someone is really willing to do that work. And I think, again, a lot of the research from Edelman, Ipsos, even our own research shows that people and consumers are more likely to engage with a brand that is values-led. And even though that research keeps persisting and telling us that people want to connect with brands in a different way than they have before, I think brands and agencies are still quite scared of being part of something divisive, being part of cancelled, even boycotted. And I feel like what is happening is the more that we see instability, the more that brands are kind of retreating and going, actually, maybe we should just look at our default audiences. Maybe we should just look at the people we've always looked at, because that's what we understand, that's what we know. And that's why this research is so important, genuinely, because there is just not enough research on communities that sit outside a default media plan. And for me, I'm quite cynical in that I don't try and appeal to brands of like, this is a good thing to do. For me, it's look at the data, look at the emerging audiences, look at how campaigns with us can move the needle for a brand, how it can cause brand uplift, and make a decision from there. Because I think trying to appeal to moral consciousness of businesses just, I don't think it's,
Yeah, thank you. So could you tell us maybe about some success stories that stand out in your mind, Nafisa, of how brands have worked effectively with your content?
Yeah, one that is really ripe in my mind at the moment is Copperfield. So they're a breast cancer charity. They came to us a year ago and they've come back to us this autumn as well. And Copperfield, if you don't know, have a very cheeky tone of voice. It's in the name brand. They're very cheeky with how they approach breast cancer. And they had a lot of preconceptions about how to talk to Muslim women about breast cancer. And they weren't sure that a humorous tone could cut through. They thought they need to be a bit modest. They need to be all these different ideas. So we worked with them to integrate their tone into Vox Pop, into out-of-home campaign, and into digital campaign. And we delivered 182% above the media plan. We saw just about 2 assets out of about 10 assets for the digital plan delivered the whole media plan because it was so engaged. And I think this is an example of you can only be funny and humorous with an audience if you know them. And so getting to know an audience and working with partners is the way you're going to cut through. And while we see big numbers, and we had like something like 340 million impressions, what really makes this like a hallmark campaign is this autumn we were recruiting for Vox Pop's participants for another Copperfield campaign. And someone came through and she said that I saw the campaign last year. It prompted me to check. I'd never checked my breast before. And she actually found something, went to her GP in January, was then diagnosed with early stage breast cancer. And the stats say that if women of color find something in the early stage, you have a 98% recovery rate compared to later stage. And the reason why Copperfield were coming to us is a lot of women of color were getting diagnosed late stage. And with that is a whole load of issues, lack of awareness, lack of people even ever having talked to them about breast cancer, both from brands, campaigns. If you think about cancer, you normally think about the pink ribbon and a lot of white women going for a 5K run. And so the Copperfield campaign was about how do we cut through to women of colour to make them think that and believe that this is something they should care about. She then went into remission this August and she came to our Vox Pop to tell her story.
Yeah, so awesome, Nafisa, amazing.
I'll tell you one more.
Yeah, of course.
Another one that I really wanted to tell is Sainsbury's. We worked with them in Ramadan. And I think it's important because the genocide in Gaza started in October. And I mentioned before that a lot of brands retreated. And this was a big retreat moment. And what we saw is if Russia and Ukraine opened up the moral consciousness of brands and agencies, Palestine firmly shut it. And we saw that come through in Ramadan, where a lot of brands who have steadily been putting more money into media plans, more money into reaching this community, especially around food, beverage, and lifestyle, because it's a big moment in Ramadan, suddenly they were nowhere to be seen out of fear, out of what will people say, what if it causes polarizations, what if we get cancelled? And I think the campaign we did is an example of where you lean into independent media and you trust that they know their audience. So Sainsbury's came to us. It was the first time they were really doing anything in Ramadan. And we said to them, you know, Ramadan is like this underground world that comes alive. And every household in Ramadan has their thing that makes Ramadan special. Similar to Christmas, right? Everyone has that thing that makes Christmas. And so we profiled 3 different families and asked them, what is Ramadan for you? And the campaign was, it's not Ramadan without. And then they told us their thing. And we profiled a Palestinian family in that campaign. And the campaign did really well. And we saw the brand uplift as well of Sainsbury's were 3rd in the sort of consideration for supermarkets, They were 3rd in the consideration of supermarkets. And then after the campaign, they jumped to 1, and 73% of our audience.
You good?
I think it's my asthma, to be honest.
Oh.
73% of our audience said that they would be more likely to shop with Sainsbury's. And I think our campaigns show that we have both scale. I think I've lost.
We can break off. We're nearly at time anyways. Nafisa, like I said at the beginning, please think of ways to engage. And I say this not in the context only of Amaliah, but of all of the other independent media brands that exist, because, like I say, we don't want the direction of travel around them to continue to be one of decline. In fact, the opposite. I would say that we need to be an industry that creates hospitable, healthy conditions for all different communities to have platforms that represent their culture and voices. And so I'll end, Nafisa, not just by thanking you for your collaboration, but also for thanking you for your contribution to our industry and for being who you are. You're welcome.
Honestly, that was terrible timing. So I think we're going to try and get the end of that story. You know where our guys outside doing the Vox Pops?
Yes.
Let's collect the end of that story. Let's circulate that so we can get those numbers, okay, so we don't miss out. But once again, big round of applause.
Thank you.